My name's Nathan Curnow. I'm the chair of the Chemical Education Group here for the WA branch of the Royal Australian Chemical Institute, and I'm also very, very lucky tonight to introduce our presenter, which I will do in a moment, Helen, who you are all here to see. I am going to just do a couple of little things first. Firstly, I'd like to give a First Nations acknowledgement. So Curtin University acknowledges all First Nations of this place we call Australia and recognises the many nations who have looked after country for more than 60,000 years. We are honoured and grateful for the privilege to maintain campuses operating in Boorloo or Perth and Kalgoorlie in Australia. We pay our respects to elders past and present as custodians and owners of these lands, and we recognise their deep knowledge and their cultural, spiritual and educational practices and aspire to learn and teach in partnership with them. Curtin also acknowledges First Nations peoples connected with our global campuses. We are committed to working in partnership with all custodians and owners to strengthen and embed First Nations voices and perspectives in our decision making now and into the future. This event is not just the Bayliss Youth Lecture, it's also a Chemaraderie, which is an event that runs regularly over the year, and it's a chance for chemists to connect with one another, and it's made possible through the Chem Centre here. We are very lucky, obviously, to have the support of the Chem Centre to be able to run events such as this. Bayliss Lectures are also made possible thanks to the generous support of Rowe Scientific, and so we always make sure they get a special acknowledgement, because Rowe's been a long time supporter of the Bayliss Youth Lecture and we couldn't do it without their support. And also we have a number of other organisations who actually make these possible at different locations, so Curtin University, the Chem Centre, Edith Cowan University, Murdoch and UWA are all sponsors and supporters of these lectures, and they're all involved in helping us connect chemistry to broader audiences. So without further ado, I am going to introduce Helen Coleman, and by way of introduction, what I would like to do is sort of tell you just a tiny bit about Helen. Helen will tell you more about herself. Helen is actually based here at Curtin University, and she is doing her PhD at the moment, which I'm sure is not very stressful and not very busy, but definitely very, very interesting. And so Helen's presentation today is actually going to connect to the work that she's been doing for her PhD, as well as her broader interests, and hopefully you'll enjoy what Helen's got to share. Helen's also a recipient of a Curt Innovation Scholarship, and they're a pretty special thing. So we're very, very lucky, Helen, to have someone who's been recognised in that way presenting to us tonight. And so I'd like to invite you to come up, and I'm going to hand over. Can we get a round of applause for Helen as well? Helen, the floor is all yours.
Okay. Right, I'm absolutely useless at voice projection, so I'm going to chuck this on because I also tend to prowl around as I talk. So if you can't hear me, do let me know and I'll try and shout a bit louder. Okay, thank you all for coming. It's lovely to see you all, and thank you to Curtin University and Raki WA for the invitation to be the Bayliss Youth Lecturer for this year. First off, I'd like to have just take a very brief minute to tell you a little bit about my background. I worked in science for 30 years in the fields of botany and chemistry, and always in the back of my mind wishing I'd love to be an artist. One day I'd love to be an artist. And about 10 years ago, the house was paid off, the kids had left home, and I finally had that freedom to change careers, and I became a full-time practicing artist. But as soon as I started working with natural dyes, all the amazing, fascinating, confusing things that were happening in the dye pot. Every time you pulled a piece of cloth out, you'd get a different colour. And I started to think about it scientifically. I thought I had left art behind, but all the botany and the chemistry was so incredibly useful to understand what was going on in that dye pot that it made me really appreciate how powerful the combination is when you have an artistic mind plus combined with all the knowledge and the discipline that comes with science. And when you marry those two together, it's an incredibly powerful combination. So my practice kind of morphed into just doing experiments, no longer making art, but just doing experiments with natural dyes and collaborating with artists to help them to understand more about the chemistry of what was going on in the dye pot and help them to see the benefit of making a bit of room in the studio for science. So today we're talking about natural dyes, and that's topical because around the world, and even in Australia, thanks to shows like War on Waste, people are starting to become aware of the downsides of fast fashion, the mountains of plastic clothing that are ending up in landfill, and the environmental pollution that this causes. And consumers are now starting to become more aware of being able to make a choice for more sustainable fashion, and they're looking for it, and they're even willing to pay extra money for sustainable fashion, but it has to be good quality. I'm particularly interested in my PhD in making really strong colours on cellulose material, on linen and cotton from natural dyes, from Australian natural dyes that can be harvested sustainably. Particularly cellulose materials, because you can get a lot of that through second-hand materials, through pre-worn clothing. There's a lot of really good linen and cotton clothing that can be over-dyed, dyed in the first place if they're white or cream, and we can feed that into a circular Australian fashion industry, and that's what I'm particularly interested in trying to find, is dyes that can make really good, strong, vibrant, durable colours on cellulose materials. And Australian dyers, artists and textile designers are now starting to look at Australian plants, and there are several databases out there that artists have done exploring the colours on linen, silk, wool with Australian plants. And that's fantastic. But when you do actually start doing natural dyeing, it doesn't take long before you realise that it's actually really hard to make really good, strong, durable colours with natural dyes. And that's the challenge that we have in Australia, to find those good dyes. Okay. Synthetic dyes. So consumers today are used to synthetic dyes on their clothing. It's the vast majority of the industry uses synthetic dyes. And synthetic dyes are designed by chemists, they're made in factories, and they have one job: to make clothing look a particular colour for a very long time. And they do it really, really well. Whereas plant dyes are made by plants, and plants, for their own selfish reasons, just make plant pigments to help with their reproduction and their survival. And they really don't care how their pigments behave on your clothes. And there's actually only a very small percentage of natural pigments that are good dyes. So that's why in the old dye books, before synthetic colours were invented, that's about 150 plus years ago, like the Plixo that was written by Rossetti back in the 16th century, you see the same types of plants in the recipes over and over and over again. Things like madder and indigo and oak galls. And thank you, Annette Wiguna, one of our local natural dyers, for creating these beautiful samples for me when I asked her. So it's not because they had less plants back then, it's because after thousands and thousands of years of research, the dyers had worked out which of these plants had pigments that made good dyes, and that's the ones they used, and that's what the global natural dye industry was built on. So those dyes that can withstand the harsh treatment that clothing gets in washing and exposure to the sun and harsh chemicals through detergents, those dyes are called fast dyes. They are light fast, They are light fast and wash fast. And they're the ones, if we're going to build a really good quality Australian natural dye industry, they're the ones that we have to find in our bush. The other dyes that they're not so good quality, you can make a colour out of them, but they're not very good. They're called fugitive dyes, just like a bank robber runs away. He's a fugitive, but fugitive dyes quickly run away. They're not going to build a quality natural dye industry that consumers are going to be happy with. So we have to watch out for them. Look for the fast ones. Okay, but our vegetation, our bush, is so diverse, and so much of it has never been thoroughly systematically tested for its natural dye property. Where do you start? These are all local native plants, except for that one on the end, if I can get this to work. This one here, Solanum nigrum. The common name for that is black nightshade, and that's a weed that you find in the bush and probably in your garden. Everybody confuses it with deadly nightshade. It's not deadly nightshade. Those little berries there are actually edible. If you find them in the bush, it's a lovely bush food. Those berries make a really good blue ink if you mix it with alum. And I've included that in this with all these other native plants, because if you're looking for local colour, don't forget about the weeds, because as well as you removing them from the bush as an environmental solution, it also opens up a whole bunch of other plant families that aren't here naturally in southwest WA. Am I echoing back off that? Feels like I am. So look to the weeds as another source of natural dye pigments. Okay, so how do you know which of our plants are going to be good dyes? What's worth investing time and money into? And that's where science can really help the artist. So the first thing is botany. Botany will help you get the scientific name for any plant that you want to test, the genus and the species. Once you have that and you stop using common names, once you have the scientific name, it unlocks all the information that is out there, that is sitting there waiting for you to access, not with a common name but with a scientific name. That's the language that botanists are using and they're publishing. And if you can tap into that, you have so much information about the group of plants that it's in, the family it's in, its ecology, everything that's been published. You need that scientific name. The second one is chemistry. If you can get your head around a bit of chemistry, then it really helps to explain what's going on in the dye pot at a molecular level, what's happening with every change that you do, every plant that you put in, and every slight tweak you do to the dye process, whether it's the time, the temperature, the ratio of pigment to water or the ratio of pigment to cloth. Every single one of those changes affects the dye outcome. So chemistry will help you to understand what's going in your dye pot. It will help you to predict the outcomes and optimise the outcomes. Now, number three, people aren't an expert at everything. So some people just want to do the art, and I totally understand that. Some people just want to do the chemistry. And that's where collaborations between artists and scientists is going to be crucial to develop an Australian natural dye industry that is of high quality. So I really hope that even the people in the audience tonight can think about possible partnerships or collaborating towards building a really good Australian natural dye industry, taking it further. So we've got to test these plants using a scientific approach. What I'm going to show you tonight is a couple of tests that you can do in the privacy of your own home or the comfort of your own studio that are really simple. You can do them at school with school kids. They're very safe to do. And all they need is a few things that you can buy at hardware stores and supermarkets. And then these tests will give you so much information about any plant that you want to test for their dye properties, and then you can make a much more informed choice going forward about what you do with that plant. So we're going to test 3 plants tonight that all have a basis in red with 4 different solutions, and I'm going to introduce the plants to you, and then I'd like to call a couple of volunteers from the audience to help me prepare and test those plants. So get ready to put your hands up. Okay, our first plant is marigum. This is what I'm doing my PhD on. I'm 3 years into it. I've taken a really deep dive on exploring marigum as a natural dye. Mari or garden is the Noongar names for Corymbia calophylla. It's used to be a eucalypt until the botanists yanked it out. You may know it from the big honky nuts that it has that inspired May Gibbs' Snugglepot and Cuddle Pie. The part that I'm interested in is this gum, this gummy sort of liquid that comes out of the side of the tree. It's not the sap that's taking the water and the nutrients up the tree. This is a liquid that's produced by the tree as a defence mechanism in response to insect attack or fungal cankers. And it produces so much of it that it comes out of the bark and runs down the side of the tree. And when this dries and crystallises, you can come along and just collect that dry, see that where that's dried there? You can just collect that off the bark. You don't even have to take the bark off. You do no damage to the tree to collect that kino. And that is a fantastic dye resource that is completely renewable and sustainable. And to make a natural dye industry in Australia going forward, that's what we need to think about, the sustainability of the harvest. So the second one we're going to do is madder. Now, the scientific name for madder is rubia. Rubia literally means red, I think in Latin. And there's a few different plants in the rubia genus that produce this red dye. And rubia belongs to the Rubiaceae family. And there's lots of plants in the Rubiaceae family that produce really good dyes. And madder and other plants in Rubiaceae have been used for thousands of years to produce really, really good red dyes. It's in the Plicto book that I showed you earlier. So this is what it looks like above the ground, but it's actually the roots that you use. The roots, you grow them for 2 or 3 years, and then you harvest the roots, chop them up, cook them up, and the roots have alizarin and other red-producing pigments, and that's the part that you use. So we'll explore that today. All right. The third one is red geranium, which is actually a pelargonium. I grow this in my garden, and red geraniums have got this beautiful red pigment in their petals that you squish it, it'll come off in your fingers. It's just so easy to get out. So we're going to explore red geranium against the other two to see how they behave as dyes. Okay. Can I have a couple of volunteers from the audience? Yay, 1. Yay, 2. Excellent. Come on up. Awesome. Hello. So tell everyone your name. What's your name?
I'm Thomas.
Thomas? Hi. And
Emma.
Emma. Oh, well done. Thank you. So what we're going to do is extract the colour from our 3 plants. We've got marigum, madder roots, and red geranium. So the mari is just coming off the bark off the tree. Madder, because it doesn't grow here in Western Australia, and I don't grow it in my garden. I've had to use commercial stuff, but that's what's in here. And red geraniums out of the garden. So we're just going to grab these, chuck them in there as well. And what I'm going to get you guys to do is mash them up with a bit of hot water, because these are all water soluble, which is a good start because a lot of plant pigments don't dissolve in water, they dissolve in alcohol, solvents or fats. So we're using water-based ones here. So here's a kettle that I boiled earlier, and we're just going to put a bit of hot water into the mari, and that will just dissolve on its own instantly. And I'm going to put a bit of hot water with your madder and a bit of hot water with your red geranium. And if you guys could just mash those, and I'll tell you when to stop. Okay. While they're doing that, we're going to talk about Yeah, turn that off. Great, thank you. So, while those guys are mashing that, so mash really hard. Elbow grease. We're going to talk about the 4 solutions that we're going to test our 3 dyes with. First 2 are mordants. Now, mordants are metal salts that, again, have been used for thousands of years by dyers to help attach the dye to the cloth. Over time, a lot of different types of metals have been used, including some really toxic ones like chrome and tin and lead. And today, dyers generally don't use those. We've just reduced it down to 2 safe ones. So the 2 that we're going to use today are aluminium sulfate. Now, aluminium sulfate forms, it's also called alum, forms naturally in some parts of the world. You can go and wild harvest alum to use as a mordant in your dyeing. I don't know of any alum formations here, so our version of wild harvesting in southwest WA is to go to Bunnings, to the pool section, and you can buy aluminium sulfate quite cheaply, and that's an easy way to buy, to get aluminium sulfate. So what I do is I make a 10% solution and label everything. So 200 grams of alum, you make it up to 2 litres of water, that's a 10% solution, let that dissolve, and that will last you a very long time. And I've got alum here for our test later in a little dropper bottle. The second metal mordant that we're going to use, so what alum does is it can, as well as helping the dye to attach to the cloth, it can brighten the dye or make it a little yellower depending on which dye you're using. The second metal mordant that we're going to use is iron sulfate. Now, iron is in everything. It's in your blood, it's in the rust in my car, gives the yellow and red colour to ochres. And you can make your own iron solution by dissolving rusty metal in vinegar, or you can again go to a hardware store, this time go into the garden section and buy iron sulfate. This is just so easy, and make up a 1% solution of this. So 1 gram in 100 mils, and you've got an iron solution where you can really tightly control the concentration of the iron. How are you guys going? Yep, good, keep going. Yep, beautiful, good job. Okay, the other 2 solutions that we're going to use are pH modifiers. Now, your pH is a measure of the acidity or the alkalinity of a solution, and it goes from 0 to 14, and 7's in the middle, and 7 is pure water. So anything that's more acidic than pure water, it goes down the scale. Anything that's more alkaline or more caustic than water gets higher. So that's how we work that out. For our test, the one that we're going to use that's more acidic is vinegar. So you can just go to the supermarket and get the vinegar off the shelf. If you can find the double strength vinegar, that's even better. This is about 4% acetic acid. If you can find the double strength one, it's 8% acetic acid, which will work even better. To go the other way, just sort of read over that. Good job, I love these guys. For a more alkaline solution, we're going to use washing soda. So again, at the supermarket, go into the laundry section, and I again make up a 10% solution, labelled differently, 200 grams in 2 litres, makes a 10% solution of washing soda, and that's a really nice alkaline solution. Okay. That's our 4 solutions that we're going to use, and they're all in these little dropper bottles. Okay, I think these guys have had enough mashing, well done. So our next step is to filter. We've got to get the plant material out, so we just have the dye. So you guys have both got a jar with a little straining cloth on it. So if you just pour your liquid into there, through the cloth, it'll leave the plant material behind. Great, that's enough. Yeah, that's beautiful. And then if you just bunch up your straining cloth, as long as we've got a bit of liquid in the jar, that's all we need, and then just pop the cloth back in the jar, back in the bowl. Yep, perfect. I won't get you to squeeze that because I forgot to bring gloves, so I won't make you do that. Okay, So now we have our three dyes all labelled, and now we're going to test them. So I'll do the first one and then I'll get you guys to test yours. Okay, so we come back over here and we've got to change this to that. Beautiful. Okay, so this is our test sheet that we're going to use to do our test. So we have 5 columns, 6 columns with the sample, and then the control. The control is the science word for this is what I'm starting with, this is what I'm going to test everything else against. So whenever you do a test, always have a control. And then we have a column for alum, a column for iron, a column for vinegar, and a column for the washing soda to see how those plants react with the different solutions. So the first one we're going to do is marry gum. So if I just take a brush and I put a bit of, I'll just take these lids off first. Okay, so we put a bit in each one. There's my control, alum, iron, vinegar, and soda. Okay, same in each. Now I'm going to put a drop of alum in there, drop of iron on there, drop of vinegar, oops, 2 drops, and a drop of soda. Okay, now I'll ask the madder to come up and do yours. So grab your jar with the madder. There's a clean brush and just pop a brush load into each one. Beautiful. So this is really simple to do. And yep, so a drop of alum into that one. Yep, great. You can do this with school kids. If you do it with primary school kids, you will end up with a swimming pool on each piece of paper. So put plastic down, or be prepared to have lots of paper towels to mop it up before you try and move it and dry it. Okay, thank you very much. And now we have red geranium. Once these are dried, you can take a photo of them while they're wet, because that's useful information as well. And then once they're dried, put them away in a cupboard, and they are incredibly useful information. You can look at them tomorrow, in a month's time, in a year's time, in 10 years' time, and see how they are changing over time. And that is, you do that for every plant, you'll soon have a really valuable reference. So what have you got there? That iron? Yep. Brilliant. Okay. Thank you, guys. Can I have a round of applause for our volunteers? Well done. Okay. That's great. Now, let's have a look at what we've created. With the marry gum, you can see that adding a bit of washing soda, changing the alkaline, making it more alkaline, has made it browner, but the big reaction has been with iron. That's because marry gum is made of 70% tannin. It's extraordinarily high in tannin. And tannin and iron, when they get together, they make black. So that's the basic recipe for making black ink in the old days. It was boiling up tannin-rich bark, chucking some iron in, or doing it in an iron pot, and you would make black ink. So this tells us that marry is very rich in tannin, and we'll talk a lot more about tannins in a little while. The madder roots, when this dries, you'll see that the alum actually helps it, makes it a little bit redder, but you can see that the washing soda already is starting to make it redder. And when you dye with madder, the traditional dyeing method is to mordant with alum and then adjust the pH with something like chalk that's slightly alkaline. So this test, when it dries, will tell us the best way to go about dyeing with it. So it's a very helpful test. But the last one, the red geranium, is what I wanted you to really see tonight. So it's got a little bit better with alum. It's got a bit of tannin in it, which is interesting, but it's this colour change with adjusting the pH. That's really interesting. Beautiful colours, but that tells you that what you're dealing with in red geranium is an anthocyanin. And as dyers, for potential Australian dye industry, dyers really need to know about anthocyanins, how to see them and what it means if you're dealing with an anthocyanin. So that's what I want to talk to you about now. So I go back to here, cool. So we've done that. So anthocyanins. Anthocyanins, literally, antho means flower, cyanin means blue. So these are the red, blue, purple, black colours that you get in flowers and fruits and leaves. They're abundant in nature. They are beautiful colours, and they are very, very tempting for dyers to try and get that colour onto cloth. But here's what you've got to know from the chemistry side. So a typical anthocyanin pigment looks like that. Now the technical term for that is chicken wire, okay? And at pH 4, if this was 0 to 14, pH 4 to 5 is just slightly acidic. And at that pH, it's actually colourless, it has no colour, okay? When we added vinegar, as the pH drops down for anthocyanins, they become red. Now what's happened is that this bit of chicken wire, or this molecule, and this molecule are just slightly different. That pH change has just slightly changed the structure of the molecule. And it's like a spot the difference game. If you look really closely, you can just see there's a little bit of difference. What that slight change in the molecular structure has done is change the way the molecule reacts with light. So we know that light, white light, like from the sun or from these lights here, it's actually made up of different sized wavelengths, and all those wavelengths have different colours of light. Like when they're split up, you get the rainbow. So when white light hits this one, what happens is that that molecule selectively absorbs blue light and it reflects red, okay? And the ability of a molecule to do that, to selectively absorb and reflect different wavelengths, makes it a chromophore. Now, it reflects the red light. Our eye gets red wavelengths and our brain interprets that as being red. So we see that as red. Amazing how the brain works, but that's how pigments and that's how dyes work. Now, if we go the other way, pH 6 to 7, that's about neutral. And I don't know if you can remember, but on this sheet, the red geranium just sitting in water, our control is purple. So that's right. Without adjusting just a neutral pH, it's purple. But when we added the washing soda, it was so alkaline, it's about pH 13, we blasted straight past that. And so it's sitting about pH 8. So remember it was green? Okay, so an anthocyanin sitting about pH 8 is green. So in this case, it's now absorbing the red light and reflecting the blue and green light. So you're seeing green just by another little change in the chemical structure, in the molecular structure. Now at this point, between pH 8 and down, this is reversible. So these, if you put a bit of vinegar here or a bit of washing soda over here, you could change it. You could change it back to the other colours. Just like the gardeners do when they change the pH of the soil and they change a red hydrangea to a blue hydrangea. You're changing the pH of the soil, that's the water's going up and affecting the anthocyanins in the petals. Once you go past pH 8 though, this happens. Oh, no, not that, this. That chicken wire is completely different. It's no longer works as a chromophore, it's broken, okay? And it's not reversible. It's broken, you can't go backwards. Now the technical term for that colour is beige. And there are a lot of recipes for beige in modern dye books. But beige literally means, it's translated to French to mean wool that hasn't been scoured or dyed. So it's it's got no colour. It's wool before you dye it. So that pigment is no longer working as a chromophore. It's gone. Now, why am I telling you all this? Because domestic laundry detergents sit around pH 9 to 11. So if you dye something with an anthocyanin, you might have a beautiful blue or purple or pink or red. As soon as you chuck it in the laundry and wash it with a normal detergent, you're going to lose it. It's going to start breaking down and it's going to go. It is a fugitive dye. And you can write labels to the customers telling them you've got to wash it with, neutral detergents and hand wash it, never put it in the sun, whatever. But your husband's going to eventually throw it in the washing machine with the Omo and you're going to lose it. Okay? And consumers don't want to know if you're selling something that's cotton that they want to wear and wash over and over again. It's got to be more durable than that. So it's got to be able to withstand normal domestic laundering. Okay, so that's why we have to be wary of fugitive dyes, and for a really good quality Australian natural dye industry, we want to find the fast dyes that can withstand that. And that's why that reaction that we saw with madder was so much less. It didn't have those big colour swings with changing the pH. So that's another indication that you've got potentially a good dye to work with. Okay. The other test that we can do at home is you've made your dyes. Now you can just paint them on a bit of paper or do a quick dye sample, put them on a bit of card, cover them in half and pop them out in the sun, like this one. Put them out in the sun, in our beautiful Australian sun, for several days and see what happens. Because if we're going to create clothing, it's going to be worn in the sun and it's going to be hung on the line outside, because that's what Australians do. So you've got to know how your dye is going to behave when it's out in the sun. So this one here, this slide shows madder at the top, red geranium and marigum, and these are all the part that was covered up. And now I'm going to show you what happens when it's out in the sun, the other half, the exposed half. Okay, madder. It faded a bit after several days in the sun, but it's still a good red. But yes, it did fade, because that's typically what natural dyes do. The red geranium faded even more, and that slide doesn't really show how badly it's faded, and it's continued to fade even though it hasn't been in the light. So it's not a good dye, and then that's without throwing it in the washing machine, and then it will just disappear completely. Now, the really exciting thing I want to show you is what marigum does in the sun, and this is why I'm so excited about this PhD that I'm doing. Marigum gets darker and redder when you put that in the sun. So if you're looking for a good Australian dye, then this has real potential. It's not going to fade on you, it's going to get better in the sun. So that's because it is made of 70% tannin. It's very rich in tannins. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about tannins. Oh, it's doing that because the tannins are reacting with the air. They're oxidising in the air and they're changing over to from tannins to quinones. Quinones are darker compounds that are really very stable dyes. So that's what's going on there. Okay. Tannins are extremely common in our native plants. Our two biggest genuses of plants are eucalyptus and acacia, the gum trees and the wattles, and they are very, very rich in tannins. So much so that at one stage our gum trees, our eucalyptus and our acacia forests were being decimated, chopped down, chopped up and shipped overseas for the international leather tanning industry. And mallet, one of our eucalyptus called mallet, was almost wiped out by this kind of exploitation. So going forward, we need to learn from the past and avoid that exploitation and find the ones that we can harvest sustainably. Now, tannins are in the plants for lots of different reasons, but a big one is for protection. The gum that's in the kino that's so rich in tannins in eucalyptus, as well as physically trying to wall off the fungus or block the holes of the borers, it also has an antibacterial and antifungal property. Tannins also taste really bad, really horrible to eat. They are very astringent and they'll dry your mouth out. So plants put tannins in things that they don't want you to eat. So if you have an unripe fruit, the seeds are still forming. The plant doesn't want a herbivore to eat that, so it puts tannins into unripe fruit. Okay? When the seeds are ripe and it now wants the herbivores to come and eat it and disperse the seeds, it changes the tannins to sugars. So now everybody come and eat these fruit and take the seeds away and poop them out and distribute my seeds. So plants have different amounts of tannins in different parts at different times, depending on the stage of the reproductive cycle and their life cycle, and what stage of life they're at. That's why, again, taking a scientific approach, good record keeping and good observation are really important when we're going to study our plants for dyes, because if you can, as well as just writing down what type of plant you had, what part of the plant was it, what stage of the reproductive cycle was it in, what's the environment in that it's growing, what sort of soil is it growing in. All of that information can build towards helping understand the variations of the dye pot, and you can start to see patterns and pull in that information from science to help explain what's going on in your dye pot. Now, I've taken this deep dive into dyeing with marigum, and I wanted to do it as best I could. And it was, I've made the decision to, as well as using contemporary dye techniques, to look at traditional dye techniques to see if I could see if there's a better way of doing it. So this is what I want to share with you now, is traditional dye techniques with tannins. Okay, and the first thing you have to know about tannins is that there are two major groups of tannins. Not tannins aren't tannins. The first group is hydrolyzable tannins. So plants can have, so there's hydrolyzable tannins or condensed tannins, and plants can have one or either or both. Hydrolyzable tannins are found in oak galls, myrobalan and sumac. Now, you may not recognise any of those names because they are all non-Australian plants. So if dyers want to use hydrolyzable tannins, you have to buy them basically in this form from a dye supplier. That's because I don't know which Australian plants are rich in hydrolyzable tannins. And so that's the first starting point for us to do research, is to find out what sort of tannins we've got in our bush. Now, hydrolyzable tannins make yellow to brown dyes, but that's not why they were used in traditional dyeing. They were used because they are fantastic biomordants, and they combine cellulose with metal mordants, the alum and the iron, and other dyes. And that's what they were used for, and traditional dyers knew the difference, and they knew that that's how you use them. Okay, a couple of examples. The Mali dyers in West Africa make a cloth called bogle and finny. It's also known as mud cloth. And they make this cloth. The first step in making this, the mud cloth, is to create a hydrolyzable tannin dye from leaves of trees that they know work really well for this process. Now, so they make their dye, and then they get their cotton and they soak it in the dye, and then they put it out in the sun. And then they get mud, not just any mud, but iron-rich mud. It's a grey-coloured mud that is rich with dissolved iron. And when you put tannin and iron together, as we saw with Mary, you make black. So, this area here is where they've painted the designs with the iron-rich mud onto the tannin. And wherever that goes, it starts to darken. And then they wash the mud off, put it back in the tannin bath, back in the sun to dry, and then they paint the design on again. It's incredibly labour intensive, but they keep doing this process until they have developed a really rich black, until the dyer is happy with it. And then they get an alkaline soap, and they go back over where the iron isn't, where the tannin was, and they paint that, and then the alkaline soap gets rid of the tannin or bleaches the tannin. So you end up with the effect that they want from Vogelan cloth, which is black designs on a white background. So it's not the colour of the tannin that they're interested in, it's this incredible affinity that it has between cellulose and the mordants. Now this example here, this is where the mud's been painted on. This is, the white is where they've gone in with the soap afterwards to remove the tannin, and then this yellow colour here is the original tannin, hasn't been taken out. So you've got the choice. The second example is Indian chintz, which has been developed over thousands of years, and this just takes it to a whole another level. So again, they start with a hydrolyzable tannin bath. This time it's myrobalan fruit, which they mix with buffalo milk. They soak the cloth in it, dry it in the sun, and then they paint their design on. Now, where they want a black design, they paint iron. Again, tannin plus iron makes black. So that's the iron straight on, makes you black. Where they want red, they paint or stamp alum onto it. Okay, now you won't see that, it'll just dry clear. But then they take that cloth and they put it in a bath made of chai roots. And chai roots are a member of the Rubiaceae family, so they're related to madder. So they also make a really good red dye. But the red only sticks where the tannin and the alum have been placed on the cloth. And then they can wash it, and the chai root dye that's on every other bit just washes off and only sticks where the alum and the tannin create that really strong bond. And then chintz goes on. It's the most extraordinary process. Then they cover up most of the cloth and just leave bare. They cover it all up with wax, just leaving bare the parts that they want blue, and then they put it in an indigo bath, maybe over and over again. And that dyes the bits that haven't been waxed blue, and then they clear all that off. Then they might paint some of the blue with a yellow dye to make it green, and then finally they will bleach it to pale off again that hydrolyzable background. So it's an extraordinary process, thousands of years old, long, long before screen printing was developed. These dyers understood the chemistry of what they were working with to create these intricate, multiple layers of coloured cloth that are very, very long lasting. Okay. The second group, the larger group of tannins that we have a lot of here in Australia is condensed tannins. Now this is an example of marri dye on linen, cellulose, silk and wool. Now silk and wool are animal fibres, and they're chemically, they can attach to the tannins a lot faster and a lot easier than linen does. So when you do these dye samples, boiling it up for an hour, you see this over and over again, that the linens are just this pale, insipid colours, and all the beautiful reds and everything are on the wool and the silk. Oh, everyone loves the wool and silk. Well, this process of boiling it for an hour and then washing it and drying it and then making something out of it, that's a very modern way of doing it. It sort of fits in with the contemporary commercial dye houses that are used to synthetic dyeing. It works with other dyes, but with tannin on cellulose really doesn't optimise the colour that you get. So that's why I wanted to look at traditional dyes to see if we can do better than this. And a couple of examples of traditional dyeing. Oh, the other problem with dyeing it for an hour and then wash it, make a garment out of it, wear it, is that it doesn't give time for the tannin to oxidise, which is what you saw in this in the marri when it changes from the light to the dark with oxygen. So what happens is that you sell this tannin dyed garment, and then it starts to oxidise while the customer's wearing it. So you get this really uneven colour changes. And an example of that is this jacket here, which has been dyed with Mary and then put out in the sun for many days. You see this beautiful colour that it develops in the sun. It's lovely, isn't it? And where the sun's hit it, it's this beautiful golden brown colour. But where the sun didn't hit it, I don't know if you can see under there, it's very pale. So underneath the arms where the sun's not hitting, it's really pale. The collar might be dark, but underneath the collar, it's really pale. So you're going to have a very unhappy customer if you sell them that, because the oxidisation process for tannins hasn't had a chance to complete. So this is why I wanted to look at how it was done in the past to see if they had a better way of doing it. So, first example is kakishibu. This is done by Japanese and Korean dyers, and they use unripe persimmon fruit. Unripe because the unripe fruit has all the tannins. When the persimmons are ripe, they're a lot sweeter. So you use unripe fruit to get all that tannin. And they chop it up and they ferment it for 2 or 3 years. Okay? It's a really long process. But they end up with this really concentrated tannin-rich dye that they then soak the cloth in and put it out in the sun for 7 to 10 days. And that allows the tannins to oxidise completely and develop these beautiful, deep orange-brown colours. This example is on mulberry paper. It's over 100 years old, and you can see the beautiful colours that have developed from it. It would have started out really pale, and it's oxidised completely, and you've got these beautiful, long-lasting colours. The second example is done by the Shipibo-Conobo people in the Peruvian Amazon. And they use, for their condensed tannins, the inner bark of what they call a mahogany tree. So they soak the bark and then they boil it to reduce it down to, again, a really concentrated dye, and then they soak their cloth in it. Soak the cloth in it and then pop it out in the sun. And then they soak it again and they pop it out in the sun. And then they soak it again and they pop it out in the sun. And every time they do this, the colour gets better and better. You're putting more and more layers of tannin on, and it's having a chance to oxidise in the sun, and the colour is getting better and better and really permanent. And they do this 6 to 8 times until they're happy with the colour, and then again they get iron-rich mud and they paint traditional designs on it. So, but with this one, with the condensed tannins, you're not trying to bleach that background colour out because that's part of the design. You're dyeing with the condensed tannin because you want that colour. So both the kakishibu dyers and the Shipibo dyers, they are now finding global markets for their products. Environmentally aware people who are really interested in these traditional techniques, plus the artists are now creating artworks and textiles that have contemporary designs. So they're taking traditional techniques, combining contemporary art to create really unique pieces. Now, this is my condensed tannin, my Mary, on linen, silk and wool. By using those traditional techniques rather than the modern boil it for an hour and finish with it, by putting it in making it more concentrated, putting it in the sun, repeating that process, this is the colour I can now get with Mary. Now that piece has been put back out in the sun, put through the washing machine 5 times and put back out in the sun again. So that's the colour after that kind of treatment. So it's a really durable, really strong colour. So the last year of my PhD is going a deep dive down into those techniques to find out how good we can make that colour. Okay. Last slide and some final thoughts. Studying traditional dyes has helped me appreciate that we can learn a lot. We can learn a lot from traditional knowledge, and the knowledge that traditional dyers have can be brought into contemporary techniques to help solve modern problems. But also, it's made me realise that these dyers, these traditional dyers, were scientists. They had an intimate understanding of their materials that they were working with and the chemistry of every step in the process. And they they knew it so well, they had so much ownership of that process that they're able to manipulate the process to create really high quality garments. They weren't just following a recipe, they were masters of this technique. But they were also artists. These pieces are not mass produced, they are made with ritual and intention, and each piece has a deep connection to the stories that the artist wants to share and the country it comes from. And yes, they are time consuming and they are labour intensive, but with modern technology we can speed up the process once we understand how that process works, which is where science comes in. But if we do the research and we find good, fast Australian dyes, then let's not waste them on fast fashion. This is our opportunity for artists, dyers and textile designers to create uniquely Australian high quality garments, textiles and artworks that share the stories, the culture and the connection to country that is so special to Australia. And that is a sustainable Australian fashion industry that's worth dying for. Thank you.